What's up, everyone? Welcome to another devlog for Klinga, the personal finance web app I'm developing. It's Tuesday afternoon, and I'm about to get started with some dev work for Klinga. If you remember, last week I partially integrated goals with Firestore by reading from the DB and populating the data in the goals template. However, I still have a bit of work left to finish up the goal creation task, which is where I'll pick up now. All right, I've made some really good progress tonight with finishing up the add a goal functionality. I started by adding validators to all of the fields in the add a goal dialog form. All three fields have the required validator. The total and monthly contribution fields also have a number validator and a minimum value of one validator. In addition, I added error messages for each invalid input, which will appear upon clicking out of the input using the blur event. And I disabled the add button at the bottom until all three fields are valid. Next, I added a call to the calculate projected completion date function to the end of the function that gets triggered by the blur event of the total and monthly contribution fields. Inside the calculate method, I check if there is a value for both the fields, and if so, the date message is updated. Finally, I added an addgoal function to the goals service that uses the adddoc function from the Angular Fire library to persist the new goal to Firestore. I then call this function from the onSubmit function that is triggered when the add button is clicked. Right now, I just closed the dialog without checking if the operation was successful. I think in the future I will experiment with adding either a progress spinner to indicate the operation is in progress, or show a snack bar message to indicate the goal was added or something went wrong. I'm leaning towards the second approach because it allows the user to continue to use the application, but still notifies whether the operation was successful or not. Anyway, I'm going to call it a night and pick back up tomorrow. Hey everyone, it's Wednesday afternoon and I was just checking back over my progress from last night. I'm very satisfied with the add a goal flow and how seamless it is. However, I do think there's one key functionality that's needed in order to close out this goals integration task, and that's the edit delete functionality. I think I have a pretty good approach to adding this functionality with minimal changes. I can add an edit button to each goal display that opens a dialog for editing. I can then extend the add a goal dialog to be used here by making the title dynamic, injecting the current values to populate the fields, and conditionally displaying a delete button at the bottom. I'll kick off today's dev work by knocking this out. So as it turns out, my approach for adding the edit delete functionality worked out perfectly. I was able to quickly update the goals display with an edit button that opens the dialog for editing. I started by placing it in the empty content projection slot of this app progress component, which is in the lower left location. However, I didn't really care for the look of it, so I experimented with swapping it with the monthly contribution text in the lower right corner. Personally, I think the layout looks much better this way, so I'm going with it. I then updated the dialog with a dynamic title that can be set inside the function that is triggered by the add or edit buttons. I set the title as add goal when the add a goal button is clicked and edit goal when one of the edit buttons are clicked. Additionally, I added a delete button to the bottom that is conditionally displayed if this is an edit dialog. You'll also notice I made the text of the action button dynamic so that it displays either add or update. Finally, I injected the data of the goal that is being edited in order to initially populate the fields. One thing that I'm not currently doing but might consider doing is disabling the update button until a change is actually made. That way, there isn't an unnecessary update call to the database. I have similar functionality for the add button when any of the fields are invalid. I'm going to wrap things up for tonight and hopefully pick back up tomorrow or Friday. What's up, guys? It's already Saturday night, and unfortunately, I didn't have time to get any dev work done the last couple of days. I was hoping to start integrating budgets with Firestore, but at the same time, I don't really want to start it on the last day of the week. There are a couple of other miscellaneous tasks that I could pick up tonight. First, I do have a bit of tech debt in the form of mobile layouts. There are a number of components which I put off optimizing for mobile devices that I need to update. However, that also sounds like a fairly sizable task for the end of the week. I also noted a couple of smaller tasks throughout this week that I could pick up. One was the behavior that happens when the add or edit goal dialog is closed. I want to experiment with a snack bar message or maybe a progress spinner for status of the DB operations. The other was the disabling of the update button at the bottom of the edit dialog until a field is actually changed. I will pick up these two smaller tasks tonight and do some general cleanup work in the goals components and service. That way, I'll start fresh next week with the budgets integration task. I'll circle back in a little bit with some updates. Hey guys, I'm just about ready to finish up for tonight. I was able to accomplish everything I set out to do tonight, and I think the goals integration task is pretty much ready to close out. I started tonight by adding the disable functionality to the update button in the edit dialog for when there aren't any changes made to the fields yet and therefore nothing to update in the DB. Once a user makes a change, the update button becomes enabled. I did this by adding a simple function that checks the form control values against the values that are injected into the dialog. Inside the function, I set a variable that I use in the template to conditionally disable the button. And I set up each field's blur event to call this function. Next, I started to experiment with the behavior of closing the dialog after the add or update button is pressed. Instead of just closing the dialog, I wanted to provide some sort of visual feedback to the user so that they know the operation was successful. I started by adding a snack bar message that gets opened as soon as the DB update completes or fails. If the operation is successful, it shows this goal successfully added or updated message. And if the operation were to fail, it would display error encountered while adding or updating goal. I was actually so pleased with this approach that I didn't even experiment with the progress spinner. Aside from these two tasks, I also did a small amount of cleanup around the goals components and service. The one change I did want to point out is the minor refactoring I did with the calculate projected completion date function. When I initially added this function, I put it in the goals component because I'm doing the calculation in the dialog to update the message. However, after I thought about it more, I believe I will also need this same functionality in other components, such as when a user actually tags a transaction with one of the goals. So I decided to move the function to the goals service, where I will be able to reuse it across multiple components by simply injecting the goals service. This makes it much easier to manage going forward because if I need to make an update to the calculation, I only have to worry about updating the one function. After this week's progress, the goals view is working very seamlessly with Firestore. The user can easily manage financial goals in order to stay on track. I'll of course be doing some additional testing going forward, but I'm ready to close out this integration task and move on to the budgets integration task starting next week. Thank you for joining me for this week's devlog on Klinga. I'm getting really excited about the progress, and I hope you are too. Be sure to subscribe to catch more updates. See you next time.